All right, hello everyone. Welcome. We are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Small Space Composting webinar. Today we are going to be discussing a city dweller's guide to food waste. Just a couple of technical things before we get going. This webinar is being recorded, so if you are interested in maybe sharing it with a friend or rewatching it yourself, it will be available up on our website, hopefully by tomorrow afternoon. So you can go ahead and keep an eye out for that. We will be utilizing the Q&A feature of our webinar today, not the chat. So if you do have questions, go ahead and put them into the Q&A feature located on the bottom of your screen. There will be time at the end of the webinar to discuss all of your questions and to give you guys answers. And then the third thing, you guys are muted, so there is no need to worry about muting yourselves. You are already muted. All right, so welcome. My name is Zoe Jump. I am the education coordinator at Keep Greater Milwaukee Beautiful. And Keep Greater Milwaukee Beautiful is a private nonprofit, and our mission is to promote clean, healthy, and beautiful communities for generations to come. And we do that through education programs. We educate all ages on various environmental education topics, such as recycling, composting, alternative energy, water pollution, water conservation, and much more. If you're interested in learning more about our organization and the things that we do around the community, you can visit our website at www.kgnb.org. So our agenda for today we are going to be specifically discussing the benefits of composting in a small space. So it's for those people who live in apartments, condos, who may not have a large backyard or even no backyard at all. And with more people than ever moving into small spaces, it's becoming increasingly important to share the good news that small space composting is in fact possible. If you are interested in learning more about how to start a traditional backyard bin, you can check out our basic backyard composting webinar recording that is on our website. We will not be discussing basic backyard composting today. We'll just be discussing small space solutions. So the first thing we're going to talk about, we are just going to briefly go over what is composting, just some of the basics. Then we will go into why should you compost. We'll talk about the importance of composting. We will also discuss the multiple ways to compost in a small space. We'll go over tips and tricks for each way, and we'll also talk about some common problems and solutions. And then there will be time for a Q&A at the end. So did you guys know that 23% of our landfill space in the United States is made up of food waste and yard trimmings? It's pretty crazy to look at that picture and see all of those oranges and apples, knowing that they're all just sitting in a landfill. It's just full of food waste. And Wisconsin actually has a recycling law that was enacted in 1993, which actually bans yard waste from landfills. So you're not supposed to put yard waste in your garbage cart, and instead you can compost your yard trimmings and your food waste. So what is composting? Composting is just using the natural process of decay to turn your organic waste, so your scraps and yard trimmings, into a valuable soil enrichment, and that is just called compost. What are some of the benefits of composting? First things first, composting is really great for the environment. You're diverting your material, and when you divert any compostable material, you're saving precious landfill space. which also hand in hand reduces your carbon footprint. Composting is also a really great way to use our 3 R words, which are reduce, reuse, and recycle. Reduce, you are reducing what you're putting in the landfill, you're reducing your food waste when you're composting. Reuse, you are actually going to be reusing those food scraps in a couple of months as enrichment for your gardens or for your soil. And then finally, recycle. You are turning something into something new, and that is what recycling is. You're turning your scraps into compost. So it is great for the environment. The second benefit of composting is soil health. So if you guys are anything like me and you have a little obsession with houseplants, composting is a great way to improve the health of potted plants in apartments or small spaces. It increases the soil water holding capacity of your plants, which means you just water them less, which is always nice not to have to worry about watering your plants. It also increases your soil nutrient retention. So your plants hold on to nutrients in the soil for much longer because of that compost. It improves soil drainage, which we know is very important to reduce rotting roots of potted plants. And it also suppresses some soil-borne plant pathogens. And the last benefit of composting is plant nutrients. A lot of people confuse compost for fertilizer, but finished compost is not technically a fertilizer, but it does contain important nutrients to help plants grow bigger, and better and stronger. And it also allows for the slow release of nitrogen and phosphorus into plants. So a nice slow release instead of fertilizer, which just feeds your plants directly by giving them excess nutrients. Compost allows for the slow release of those nutrients. So now that we know the basics and we know why it's important to compost, we will get started on the options for composting in small spaces. So we are going to go through 2 separate categories. Our first category will be if you don't have any yard space available. You don't even have to have a balcony for these options. You could just have your apartment or a small space. And then the second option we're going to talk about is if you have a small yard. So if you live in a rental home or a duplex or even an apartment with access to a small yard space, these options on the right-hand side might be the best options for you. Please always remember to get permission from your landlord before you start any composting outside. Your landlord might not want you putting your rotting food waste in his backyard, so just please ask permission before you start your compost pile. So we are going to go through each option and you guys can decide what's going to work best for you and your space. And we will be starting with the no yard options, and those are going to be a worm bin or a vermicomposting bin. We are going to talk about an electric composter, and we're also going to discuss collecting compost and taking it to a local compost drop-off. For small yard, we will talk about a compost tumbler. And then the other option, if you have a small yard, is a traditional backyard bin. These are either a manufactured bin or you can build your own. We will not be discussing these backyard bins today. We have a whole webinar just on that one backyard bin topic alone, so you can go ahead to our website and you can watch that recording after this one if you decide that is the best option for you. So we're going to get started with vermicomposting. So some people might prefer a wormless composting system, but please give the worms a chance. They're such hard workers and they're really easy to manage. And if you manage the bin correctly and you get their living conditions correct, they won't bother you at all. So vermicomposting is indoor composting that uses red wiggler worms. And these worms speed up the decomposition process of your kitchen scraps, which produces a better end product because of their worm castings. So worm castings are packed with minerals that are essential to plant growth. These minerals are like nitrates, phosphorus, magnesium, potassium, calcium, all the things your plants need to grow bigger and better. And the worms in your bin can actually eat up to half of their body weight in scraps a day. So they are very, very hard workers. They do all the work for you, and you just get to reap all the benefits and all of the rewards of having a worm bin. So how do you start a vermicomposting bin? We are going to talk about supplies and then the directions. For supplies, you're going to need your worms, specifically red wiggler worms. You're not going to want to buy any other type of worm, no earthworms. You just want those red wigglers. You're going to need bedding for your worms, which is just shredded newspaper, shredded paper, dried out leaves, cardboard. Any of that brown material will be great for your bedding. You're going to need a drill. You'll need fruit and vegetable scraps. And you'll also need a large opaque container with 2 lids. And we'll talk about why you need 2 lids in just a couple of minutes. Instructions for your worm bin. So first things first, you're going to want to buy some worms. You can buy red wigglers at pet stores. You can buy them at bait shops. There's a lot of places in Milwaukee to buy them. You can even buy them online, and they just come to your doorstep all ready to go. So lots of options for where to buy your worms. A 5-gallon bucket worm bin can easily accommodate up to 400 worms, so you're going to want to invest in quite a few to begin with. 400 to 500 worms can cost between $20 to $35, just depending on where you get your worms. So it is a little bit of a startup fee, but once you buy the worms, you are good to go. I've also seen small space composting systems hold up to 4,000 worms. So you can really pack a lot of them into a small space. The second step is going to be drilling holes in your bin. So you're going to want to drill a few holes in the top and sides of your bin, just the sides at the, very close to the top of it, to increase airflow. And then you're also going to want to drill a few holes in the bottom of your bin just to be safe, to allow for drainage in case the bin gets too wet. Once your holes are drilled, you're going to add your worm bedding. So fill the bottom of your container with newspaper, dry leaves, or other brown material. And then you're going to want to add enough water to the bedding so it feels like a wrung out sponge. So it should, if you squeeze the bedding with your hands, it should stick together, but it shouldn't drip any water. This step is very important because worms are mostly made up of water, so they really need a moist environment to thrive. After your bedding is nice and moist, you're going to add your food scraps. Only fill the bin 3/4 of the way full with everything so you can give the worms enough air at the top of your bin. And then lastly, you're going to add your worms. So once your bedding is nice and full and your bin has scraps in it, you're going to place the worms at the top of your bedding and just let their natural tendencies do the work for you. So allow the worms to settle in for a couple of days. It does take them time to get established in your bin and start working. In the beginning, stick with a few bits of scraps and allow the worms to eat all of the scraps in their entirety before adding more. This will really allow you to kind of learn how much food your worms can handle. And then each time after, just add a few more food scraps and make sure to cover them with a layer of newspaper and make sure that the bedding is always wet enough, and then you can just continue adding scraps as you wish. So what container should you use? You can get creative with your worm container. You don't need anything fancy. Any large container will work as long as it doesn't let a lot of light in. Your worms aren't going to like a lot of light, so make sure the bin is nice and dark and opaque. If you're using a 5-gallon bucket, make sure it has a well-fitting lid. The 2 containers on the left and the middle, those come with pre-fitting lids, but 5-gallon buckets don't always, so make sure you always have a lid on top of your vermicomposting bin. And then you always want to put something underneath your container to collect any liquid draining from the bottom. So you could buy another lid and put it on the bottom of it, or you could buy any sort of mat that is rubber that won't absorb the water, and then you can go ahead and wipe the water up. So that's kind of like the picture in the middle. But yeah, you can just get creative and use really whatever you have. What should you feed your worms? Your worms are going to thrive on a very balanced diet, and they're always going to want at least 75% of their bin to be bedding. So as we already discussed, that is also known as your brown material, since it is rich in carbon. So the bedding is basically the carbs, the carbon for your worms. And then the other 25% of your bin should be that nitrogen-rich fruit and vegetable scraps. It's really rich in nitrogen, and it's called green material. So really try and keep a balanced diet of 75% brown, or the bedding, and then 25% green, which is your scraps. You can also compost eggshells and coffee grounds. The worms like a lot of grittiness to their environment, so I've learned that the eggshells and the coffee grounds really add a lot of grittiness for them. So if you're a coffee drinker, then go ahead and you can put your used coffee grounds in there. They also like tea bags or any type of loose leaf tea. You can go ahead and add those into your bin as well. The things that your worms are not going to like are going to be spicy or salty foods like peppers and onions. Keep those out of your bin. They also don't like foods that are very high acidic foods like lemons and limes. These increase the pH of your bin, and you don't want that. So try and limit the acidic foods you're putting into your bin. No meat, no fish, no dairy products whatsoever, so no cheese or any milk products. Do not put any oil in your bin, and no bones. It doesn't matter if all the meat is off of the bones. Keep the bones out of your bin. Common problems and solutions for vermicomposting. So one of the most common problems is flies. Flies will only become a problem if you're in your bin, if there is something in there that they can get to easily. So when you add your scraps, always make sure that you cover them. So bury your scraps a little bit into your bin, and the flies shouldn't be able to find the food as easily. If you have worms crawling up the sides, your worms are trying to escape, which usually means something is wrong with their living conditions, and that's why they're trying to escape. 2 options for this. Your bin could be too wet and they're trying to get out of the wetness, so try adding more bedding in there, or they need more air. So try adding some more air holes on the top of your bin, and they shouldn't be escaping after that. If your bin smells, just make sure you're always burying your food you add, and always cover it with a layer of bedding to kind of suppress the smell. If your bin smells awful, like rancid, rotting food, you should add less food to your bin. So you're not going to want to treat your vermicomposting bin like a trash can. Only add as much as the worms can eat. This may be a little hard to figure out at first, but once you've made some observations over a couple of weeks, you should be able to tell how much your worms can eat in a typical day or a typical week. And the worms should be able to eat all the food you give them before any awful rancid smells start to come out of your bin. If you do find that you have excess waste and the worms aren't eating it fast enough, you could consider building another vermicomposting bin, or you could build a larger vermicomposting bin and add more worms. So in conclusion, vermicomposting pros and cons. The pros are that it fits in small spaces. If you start with a 5-gallon bucket, you can pretty much fit it anywhere. It can go under your kitchen cabinet. It can go in a closet. If you have a balcony, it can go out on your balcony as long as you're bringing it inside during the fall and winter. So very easy to fit in small spaces. You also don't need to monitor temperature of a vermicomposting bin. This pertains to basic backyard composting. You do have to maintain a pretty high temperature for the compost process to work. Since we're working with these red wiggler worms, they do all the work for you, so your bin doesn't need to stay a certain temperature. And like I said, the worms do all the work for you, so it's very easy. And there's also no need to turn your pile. So again, with the basic backyard composting, you have to get a pitchfork or a shovel, and you have to physically turn your compost pile to aerate it a couple times a month. There's no need to turn your worm bin. The worms will make all their air holes, and you don't need to add any more air to it than just the holes that you drill. What about the cons? There aren't many cons to vermicomposting. The only two are that the materials you can compost are limited, since the worms don't like that spicy and salty food, and they don't like acidic food, so there are a couple of things that you can't put in there. And then worms. Worms are kind of creepy crawly. They freak people out. Just thinking about having 500 worms crawling in a container in your house might be a little creepy to people. If that freaks you out, no worries. We are going to talk about other ways you can still compost without having worms in your house. So stay tuned. All right, electric composter. I just found out about an electric composter a little more than a year ago. These are a very low maintenance way to compost. So the photo you see on the screen is called a food cycler, and you can buy these off of the food cycler website, or you can also buy them on Amazon. They are basically machines that use electricity to turn your food scraps into a mulch-like material, and it only takes 3 hours to do this, depending on how many scraps you put into your food cycler. The food cycler is essentially a dehydrator, and it grinds up your organic waste. It just slowly dehydrates and grinds the material you put in it, and the end product is a dry granulated organic waste, like the picture you see on the right. And you can sprinkle this and mix it directly into your soil for your potted plants or container gardening. So very quick, very efficient. It's a pretty cool contraption. So pros and cons to electric composting. You're not going to need a supply list or an instruction manual. You just press one button. It's very easy to maintain. It's a very quick process. Depending on how much you add, it only takes 3 hours. I've heard it can take up to 8 hours. But if you run it overnight when you're asleep, you won't even know. It also doesn't require any ground material to make the finished product. So like the worm composting, I really talked about maintaining that balanced diet for the worms with the 75% brown, the 25% green. You don't have to worry about that for an electric composter. It doesn't require any brown material. You can just put your food scraps in there. It's also odorless, so it won't smell up your house. You'll never have to deal with any awful or rancid smells. It's completely odorless. It does have a filter on the back of it, which you do have to replace, I think like twice a year, and that filter just cuts down on the odor. And lastly, it is very compact. So like any other kitchen contraption, you can keep it in your cupboard or in your closet. It's very small. And you can also run the little bucket that turns the scraps into compost. You can put that through the dishwasher, so it's really easy to clean as well. Cons to an electric composter. We just said it doesn't require any brown material, but a con is that it actually can't dehydrate brown material. So if you are looking to start composting because you have a lot of shredded paper or a lot of newspaper or yard trimmings, this will not be the option for you since it physically cannot dehydrate that material. So you're only going to put food scraps in it. It also uses electricity, which is an added cost. The electric composter is a fairly expensive composting system compared to the other systems we're going to talk about today. They can run between $300 and $400, just depending on what sort of settings and how fancy you want it to be. So keep that in mind. And since you're just dehydrating your food, there are going to be less nutrients in your compost in an electric composter compared to traditional compost. So traditional compost, we're either using macro decomposers like worms, or we're relying on micro decomposers like microbes, bacteria, fungi, all of that to do the work for you. But this doesn't have any decomposers, it's just dehydrating and grinding. So there's going to be less nutrients in it than traditional compost. On to our next option. This is going to be simply just collecting compost in your house and not having a physical composting system. If you aren't interested in worms or investing in an electric composter, this might be a good option for you. Adding food scraps to your garden or adding compost to your potted plants does not have to be the final goal to composting. Just keeping your food scraps out of the landfill is really important, and that can be the only reason why you're doing this. So you're going to need any kind of container with ventilation. It should also have a top. This is a great opportunity to reuse things around your house. You can use an old coffee container, a small bucket, or you can buy a cute compost collector like the one on the screen from the local garden store. So it's just up to you on what you want it to look like. And this can either go under your sink, or you can just keep it right on your sink near where you cut up your food scraps for easy access. You are going to want to try and maintain a 25% kitchen scraps or green material to a 75% paper products or brown material. This isn't necessarily to keep any decomposers happy, it's more for the smell. So every time you add green material, you're going to want to add double brown material to keep the smells really low. And when you're done with your bin, you always want to end with brown material on top. And if smells do become a problem, you can also purchase a charcoal filter to reduce odors. So you can find those at gardening stores or on Amazon. Final sources for your collected compost. So first things first, ask around, ask a friend, ask a neighbor, maybe post it on, if you are a part of a community page in your neighborhood or your town, post it on there. and see if anyone wants your compost. See if you can contribute to someone's compost bin or garden. I'm sure there'll be a lot of people that will happily take your scraps off of your hands. If that isn't an option, you can build a compost bin in your backyard if you have access to a small yard space. Again, always ask your landlord before you do this. It does alter the lawn, so make sure you have permission. And if you are interested in learning more about that backyard composting, then you can go ahead and check out our basic backyard composting webinar on our website. You could also find a drop-off site for your compost. So there is a website called sharewaste.com, and you can add in your zip code or your address, and it'll show you all of the options around you that are accepting compost. And usually it's free. A lot of these options are going to be in rural areas, so more farms and things a little bit out of Milwaukee. So you do have to be comfortable driving. But other than that, Share Waste is a very good option. The next option for your finished compost would be a small bucket pickup program. So this would be you reach out to a company and they are going to give you a bucket and they are going to pick up your compost for you either monthly or weekly depending on your needs. There's a company called Kirby's Compost Pickup. They deal with the entire greater Milwaukee area, and the smallest bucket they offer starts at $8.95 a month. So it's just like garbage day or recycling day. The day you choose for them to pick up that month, you're just going to put the bin out on your curb. They'll take your compost, and then they'll leave you with a empty compost bin, and you'll start all over. There's also a company called Waste Not. It's the same sort of process as Kirby's Compost Pickup. This starts at $4 a week, so it's a weekly pickup, not a monthly pickup. So if you are making more compost and you need them to come every week, this would be a better option for you. There's also large-scale pickup programs through Compost Crusaders. So if you live in a multi-unit apartment building or a large condo and you can get a bunch of people together to all start composting, like maybe 8 or 10 units all together, Compost Crusaders will give you a very large cart similar to what a recycling or a garbage cart looks like, and all of the units in your building can contribute to that bin, and then they come and pick it up every month, just like Kirby's and Waste Not. I'm not necessarily sure on the prices for this, but they do give you free quotes on their website. And again, they're called Compost Crusaders, so you can check them out if you want to get your whole apartment unit involved in this, which would be awesome. That'd be really great. And then lastly, you don't have to give away your compost. If you have a lot of container gardens, or maybe a small herb garden outside, or you just have a lot of potted plants like myself, you can put your finished compost into your container gardens. Okay, compost collection conclusion. There aren't too many pros and cons to talk about, but the first pro will definitely be just a very minimal, simple system. There's a minimal startup cost. All you need is any type of container with a lid, and that also makes it really easy to maintain. You don't really have to follow a super strict balanced diet since you're not dealing with worms. Just very, very easy. And then really the only con to the compost collection is that those compost pickups can get costly, just an added cost, so that could be a con to this. Now we are moving on to the options if you do have access to a yard space. So it doesn't need to be a large yard space. It doesn't need to be anything fancy. You can even put one of these out on your balcony. So you don't even necessarily need a yard space. It's just nice to keep it out in your yard. So this is a tumbler bin system. And this system makes compost using really high temperatures. And it uses the work of bacteria and fungi that find their way to your bin. So you don't have to add any microbes into your bin. So when the microbes mix with the organic material, it infuses fresh oxygen to your pile. So that's why it's called a tumbler. So this is a well-ventilated large barrel that's usually made out of recycled plastic, and it usually has a little handle on the side and you can rotate it. The more air you infuse your compost with, the faster your compost will be finished. So using a tumbler system, sometimes the piles can be completed in 3 weeks. This would be turning your bin 2 to 3 times a week, but it's a very, very quick process in a tumbler system. It's very self-contained. You don't need to add any worms to your bin. Actually, do not add worms to your bin. It will get too hot for them and they will not be able to escape the tumbler. Worms are a macro decomposer, and this system thrives with only micro decomposers, so the bacteria and the fungi. And you also want to keep your tumbler system as moist as a wrung out sponge. So when you hold the material in your hands, it should stick together, but it shouldn't drip any water. What can you put in your tumbler system? You're going to want to keep the 25% green material, so that will be your fruit and vegetable scraps. Unlike the worm bin, you can add peppers and onions and salty things in here. That's totally fine. Coffee grounds, tea bags, eggshells, and you can also add citrus in small amounts. So not a lot of lemons and limes, but if you do have some orange or grapefruit peels, you can throw those in there just fine. And then you're going to need brown material, so yard trimmings, sticks, leaves, paper, all of that stuff can be your brown material. Just make sure that it's shredded. So tumbler systems are pretty small depending on which one you buy. So make sure you're shredding up your brown material so it breaks down quicker. You shouldn't put any meat or fish into your tumbler. Nothing fat, no oil, no dairy products, no bones, definitely not any pet waste, and try and avoid weeds that have gone to seed or weeds that are hard to kill, like garlic mustard. Don't put those in your tumbler bin. Common problems with a tumbler system. If your tumbler starts to smell bad, that means that the pile is too wet. So you're going to want to add more brown material, such as shredded paper. If you do live in an apartment building and the tumbler is outside, you are going to want to keep it smelling nice. So always make sure that you're adding enough brown material to keep those odors at bay. If the pile stops breaking down, that means that your bin is too dry. I know it's kind of tough to navigate if it's, is it too wet, is it too dry? But if it's too dry, you're just going to want to add more greens. So if it's too wet, add more brown. If it's too dry, add more greens. If you don't have any greens at the time, you could add water a cup at a time. So don't douse your pile in water with a hose, just add it a cup at a time. If you find that your tumbler is getting full very easily, you can revert back to the composting at home guidelines, and you can also get a bigger tumbler system, or you can collect compost in a large bucket in your house for the meantime. Pros and cons to our tumbler bin system. First pro is that it's going to be really easy to turn. You just use that handle on the side to turn it. You don't need to use a shovel or a pitchfork. It's just really easy to turn. It also requires minimal yard space. You can even put one of these on concrete It doesn't require to be on grass, which is nice for apartment buildings, which also doesn't require permanent alterations to your lawn, so it's not going to hurt what's already there. Another really great positive for the tumbler bin system is that it doesn't attract vermin. So basic backyard bins tend to attract rats sometimes, mice, raccoons. I mean, you're throwing your scraps just out in your yard. So obviously it's going to attract some vermin, but this tumbler bin is a closed system. So it doesn't attract any vermin, nothing can get in there. And lastly, it's a very quick process. If you turn your bin 2 to 3 times a week, you will have finished compost in about 3 weeks. So very, very quick process. And really the only con to the tumbler bin system is that it's a fairly expensive composting system. Depending on how fancy you want to get with your tumbler and on how big of a system you want, it can cost you between $80 and $200. And you can buy these at Home Depot, Menards, you can order them online, they're pretty common. So now that we've discussed all of your options, I bet you guys are wondering, how do I know when my compost is finished? So when your compost is mature and ready to use, it will be dark brown in color, almost black. It will be crumbly and loose, so it'll just crumble right out of your hand. It shouldn't really be wet. It should also have an earthy smell. So it shouldn't smell like any detectable food. It shouldn't smell rotten or rancid. It should just kind of smell like dirt. Just a nice earthy smell. And it also shouldn't contain any recognizable material. So if there's a huge apple core still in there, then your compost isn't finished yet. This is just a short video, and it just shows you what the finished compost looks like. So as you can see, it's almost black in color. It's very loose. It's just kind of running out of her hands, and there's no food in it. So that's what it should look like. Compost tea. Compost tea is a fun way to use your compost. So it's not tea for you, it's going to be tea for your plants. So to make compost tea, you can soak a porous bag or a mesh bag filled with compost and water for several hours. You're just going to steep it. Make sure you're stirring it every 20 to 30 minutes. And then you can use this tea you make on your houseplants without having to spread compost on top of them or mix compost into already mature houseplant pots. You can just mix this with your regular water that you give them, and it will be really great for your plants. Once you're done, you can place your compost tea grounds back into your compost pile. Another fun thing to do with compost is to get the whole family involved, so it doesn't have to be just you doing it. You can get your kids or your grandkids or your nieces and nephews involved. There's a really fun book called Compost Stew, and it's a recipe for compost. So they go through the whole alphabet, A to Z, and they talk about the things you can put in your compost bin. It's really fun. You can also have your kids help bring the food scraps to your compost bin. And you can even investigate your compost and dig for worms. We do compost investigations at the KG&B Education Center, and the kids start out being really afraid of the worms, but by the end of the program, they have red wiggler worms crawling all over their hands. So kids really like digging for worms. So a fun way to get the whole family involved. If you made it through the whole webinar and you decided none of these options are really right for me, I don't want to invest in any of these, I don't really want worms in my house, make sure that you are using a garbage disposal. So even if you're not composting your food scraps, a garbage disposal is a great resource to dispose of your food waste rather than it going down the drain. This prevents our solid food waste from entering the sewage system. And you can find out more about this at mmsd.com. So go ahead and check out that link. Other resources for composting, if you visit our website, which is www.kgmb.org/webinars, you can access today's webinar recording, which will probably be up by tomorrow afternoon. And you can also access all of our previous webinar recordings. So we did one 2 weeks ago on recycling do's and don'ts. We went through all the things you can and can't recycle. We really got into the nitty-gritty in that one, so check that one out. We also did a basic backyard composting webinar where we just talked about compost bins in your backyard. So if you want more information about that, that is up there too. If a question arises in the following weeks, maybe you're starting your compost bin this month, you can shoot me an email. My email is just my first name, Zoe, Z-O-E, @kgmb.org. You can ask me any question you want, or if you just want to say hi, go ahead. And other great resources for composting are going to be Compost Crusaders and Compost Kids. They have a lot of good infographics on their website, a lot of good composting reminders. So go ahead and check out those other organizations as well. And then one last thing, we do webinars on the 2nd and the 4th Wednesday of every month. That is our Webinar Wednesdays series. The ones coming up in June are going to be on June 10th at 2 p.m. And this is going to be a guide to landfill diversion. So we are going to dig really deep into reduce and reuse. We're going to go beyond recycling and composting. We're going to talk about other ways you can divert your waste from the landfill. And on June 24th at 11 a.m. will be our Sustainable Summers webinar. So we're going to kick off the summer and tell you 10 easy ways that you can be sustainable this summer. If you're interested in either of these webinars, you can register at kgmb.org/webinars. All right, well, I just want to thank everyone so much for joining us today. I hope you guys learned a lot and found a composting system that's going to work for you and your lifestyle. Again, if you have any questions, please send me an email and let me know. And other than that, please enjoy the weather. Have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you.